Something is happening across Canada that no pollster predicted, no strategist planned, and no American official was prepared for. It isn't loud, it isn't organized, and it isn't political in the traditional sense. Yet it is shaking the entire foundation of the US-Canada relationship in a way no trade deal or diplomatic speech ever has. Because, for the first time in modern history, millions of Canadians are choosing to walk away from the United States. Not in outrage, not in protest, but in something far more powerful: silence. They aren't crossing the border. They aren't booking flights. They aren't spending weekends in Buffalo, Detroit, or Seattle. They simply stopped going. And the numbers coming out this week are unlike anything ever recorded in North American travel history. This isn't a boycott announced on social media. It's a national decision made quietly, trip by trip, family by family, until the impact became impossible to ignore. And the most stunning part? Without saying a word, Canadians have delivered a message louder than any political speech. Canada doesn't have to depend on America anymore. This is the story of how a quiet shift in Canadian behavior, sparked by pride, shaped by frustration, and fueled by a changing identity, just created the most unexpected economic and cultural revolution in a generation. When the travel numbers first came out, even analysts were stunned. A sudden drop of 30% in land travel, nearly 24% by air. Over 1 million fewer weekend trips, shopping runs, hockey tournaments, and family vacations. On paper, it looked like a statistical anomaly. But it wasn't a glitch. It was a movement. For decades, crossing into the United States was second nature for Canadians. Cheaper gas, cheaper flights, outlet malls, theater shows, beaches, theme parks. America was the default destination. It didn't require thought. It didn't require planning. It was simply what Canadians did. But this past year, something broke. Tariffs on steel, lumber, and auto parts weren't just economic policies. They were insults wrapped in paperwork. Trump calling Canada the 51st state wasn't just rhetoric. It was humiliation disguised as bravado. Every jab, every nickname, every threat added to a growing pile of resentment that Canadians didn't fully acknowledge until it reached a breaking point. And when that moment arrived, Canadians didn't protest. They didn't yell. They didn't argue online. They just stayed home. By October, the numbers were undeniable, and the U.S. began to panic. Because while Washington thought it was punishing Canada with tariffs, it never considered how badly losing Canadians would punish America instead. But that was only the beginning. The shift wasn't about economics. It was emotional. Canadians felt disrespected, dismissed, treated like a province rather than a sovereign nation. The America First slogan didn't just say America was first, it implied everyone else was last. And Canadians felt the sting every time Trump weaponized tariffs, mocked alliances, or suggested annexing Canada as a punchline. But here's the twist. Canadians weren't just reacting to Trump, they were rethinking the entire relationship. For years, Canadians tolerated being overshadowed because the U.S. was convenient. Big malls, cheap flights, sun destinations. It was easy. But convenience doesn't survive humiliation. And once Canadians realized they had alternatives, they started using them. The mindset shift was subtle but powerful. Canada didn't have to rely on a neighbor that treated it with contempt. It didn't have to buy goods from companies that mocked its sovereignty. It didn't have to take vacations in a country where leadership viewed it as disposable. This wasn't anger. It was self-respect. By the time reporters asked Canadians why they weren't traveling south anymore, the answer was simple. We're done. But that wasn't even the most dramatic part. The real shock came next, when U.S. border cities realized what they were losing. For decades, border towns thrived because of Canadians. Detroit's restaurants stayed full because of weekend visitors from Windsor. Buffalo's malls survived because of Ontarians. Seattle depended on British Columbia. Upstate New York lived off cross-border shopping. Then, the boycott hit. Hotels slashed prices by up to 40%. Shopping malls reduced operating hours. Gas stations that once buzzed with Ontario license plates now sat empty. Entire business districts built around Canadian traffic suddenly found themselves without customers. The U.S. Travel Association revealed the devastating numbers. 6.3% drop in international travel. 3.2% decline in tourism spending. $5.7 billion lost in a single year. And behind those massive numbers was one group: Canadians. Local businesses launched promotions, discounts, deals, welcome-back incentives, desperate to lure Canadians across the border. But promotions couldn't fix what was broken. Canadians no longer felt welcomed. They no longer felt respected, and no coupon could undo years of hostility. While America scrambled to patch the hole, Canadians had already found something better, something stronger than any Black Friday deal or Florida resort. They found Canada. What happened next transformed the country. When Mark Carney became Prime Minister, one of his earliest messages was simple: "Every dollar you spend at home builds our future." At the time, it sounded like patriotic encouragement, but when the travel boycott exploded, it became a national movement. Canadians didn't cancel vacations. They rerouted them. Florida beaches were replaced by Whistler's mountains. Los Angeles attractions were traded for Vancouver Island trails. New York's energy shifted toward Montreal's festivals. It wasn't a downgrade. It was a rediscovery. Domestic tourism surged. Local businesses thrived. Airlines added new routes across Canada. Hotels expanded in the Rockies. Small towns saw tourism booms they never anticipated. It wasn't government forcing change. It was Canadians choosing change. And Carney? He didn't need to isolate Trump. Canadians were doing it for him. His Buy Canadian and Build at Home initiatives suddenly fit the moment perfectly, turning a reaction into a long-term strategy. Canada was no longer spending its money outside the country. It was reinvesting it at home. And the results were more powerful than any policy speech. But this shift wasn't just economic. It was cultural. As domestic travel grew, something unexpected happened. Canadians began reconnecting with their own identity. They saw the beauty of their landscapes, the diversity of their cities, the strength of their communities. They realized they didn't need a foreign destination to validate their vacation. Canada became the destination. The pride was organic, not forced, not political, just real. Canadian businesses became the first choice. Canadian entertainment became the first choice. Canadian products became the first choice. What started as frustration transformed into confidence. A confidence Canadians didn't even realize they had been missing. Identities shifted from proximity to independence, from relying on America to relying on themselves, from admiration of the U.S. to pride in Canada. This wasn't a protest anymore. It was evolution. And ironically, the man who pushed it forward the most wasn't Canadian. The same tariffs meant to pressure Canada only pushed Canadians further away. The same insults meant to intimidate Canada only made Canadians more united. The same nationalist slogans meant to strengthen America ended up isolating it. Trump wanted America to stand alone. He just never imagined Canada would stand alone too, but stronger, calmer, and more confident. As the travel numbers collapsed, something important became clear. This wasn't a temporary boycott. It was a generational shift, a change in mindset, a new identity. And the U.S. was losing more than tourists. It was losing influence. Canada wasn't asking permission anymore. It wasn't seeking approval. It wasn't waiting for validation. The quiet boycott had become a blueprint for independence. And now, the movement entered its most surprising phase yet. What began as a reaction to Trump's insults has transformed into something much bigger. A cultural turning point that's reshaping Canadian life in ways no one predicted. Canadians are no longer looking south for guidance, approval, or opportunity. They're looking inward, rediscovering the strength of their own markets and the potential of their own communities. Airlines are adding domestic routes not because of government mandates, but because demand is exploding. Hotels in Banff, Kelowna, Halifax, and St. John's are thriving with year-round bookings. Restaurants in cities like Victoria and Ottawa are reporting record traffic. Tourism boards inside Canada are experiencing the kind of momentum they once envied in U.S. destinations. And this time, the growth is being driven entirely by Canadians themselves. The most fascinating part is how natural the shift feels. It doesn't resemble a boycott anymore. It feels like a correction. Canada reconnecting with what it had all along. The travel patterns, the spending habits, the economic flows are reflecting a new mindset. Canada doesn't have to lean on anyone else to thrive. It doesn't need to be tethered to U.S. politics or dependent on U.S. discounts to feel secure. Canadians are realizing they can define their own economic direction without waiting for Washington. Even border towns inside Canada are changing. Instead of serving as gateways to the U.S., they're becoming vibrant hubs of local tourism and weekend getaways. Families are visiting each other more. Young people are exploring the country instead of defaulting to American trips. Retirees are discovering new destinations without crossing a border. The cultural shift isn't just visible, it's measurable. This new era is proving something important. Independence isn't loud. It doesn't come with speeches or protests. It comes with everyday choices, quiet, consistent decisions that redirect billions of dollars and reshape national identity. And Canadians, without realizing it, have built one of the most effective grassroots economic movements in modern history. The U.S. is still trying to bring Canadians back with discounts and promotions. But the truth is, Canadians have already moved on. The emotional connection has shifted, and once a nation chooses itself, it rarely goes back. The collapse of Canadian travel to the United States is more than a statistic. It's a turning point in the story of two nations that spent over a century bound by convenience, geography, and habit. For decades, the U.S. assumed it would always be Canada's first choice. The first destination for vacations, the first market for trade, the first partner for opportunity. But this year proved something different. Convenience cannot survive disrespect. What happened wasn't caused by a single tariff, comment, or policy. It was the accumulation of years of frustration, years of being referred to as the 51st state, years of watching Washington use Canada as a bargaining chip in fights with other countries. Years of being told America was first, while Canada was treated as an afterthought. Eventually, Canadians reached their limit, not in anger, but in clarity. The most powerful revolutions are the quiet ones, the choices people make without announcing them, the shifts that happen organically, without leadership or coordination. And that's exactly what this movement has become. It isn't about punishing the U.S. It's about prioritizing Canada. Canadians realized they didn't have to cross the border to find world-class vacations, incredible restaurants, thriving cities, or beautiful landscapes. They didn't have to depend on a country that mocked their sovereignty. They didn't have to support economies that didn't respect them. Instead, they found pride in spending at home, strengthening their own communities, investing in their own industries, and discovering their own country. This isn't Canada turning away from the United States out of hostility. It's Canada stepping into its own future with confidence. A future where identity isn't defined by proximity to America, but by pride in being Canadian. A future where independence isn't declared, it's lived. This is Northern Pulse, and Canada is choosing itself.